let's start to explore some of the truly automated selection tools that have been developed for Photoshop. Select Subject being one of the most powerful. It can often isolate exactly what you want with the click of a button. So there's not a single variable to change with Select Subject. You just hit it and go. What you see is what you get. So color range is another great tool based on colors. So you see how Adobe has implemented different versions of similar methodologies for understanding the boundaries of subjects in a photograph. I'm holding down Shift and just clicking on all the areas of the image, and you can see how that changes this little preview here. So what this is doing is showing me, just with a grayscale model, of the areas that are being selected in the image. So I know now, because so much of this is now white, that clicking in that green there was not really a desirable result, because it thinks the blue out here in the sky is very close to that green. I just undid that by hitting Command Z. And what I can do is just more carefully make some of these selections, and you see how it's kind of filling out the image a bit. Now it's starting to pull in some of the sky, and I can adjust this slider to adjust the threshold of that selection. If we turn on localized color clusters, that works similarly to the contiguous option. You can also detect faces for when we are trying to sample skin tones. It does some additional calculations to target skin tones. And you can base the selection off of preset primaries and secondary colors, luminosity ranges, and skin tones. Just click reds and see how well it selects reds. Does a pretty good job. It's too bad that this preview is so small, because it can kind of be hard to see, but if I click OK, you can see this. If it doesn't get you the selection that you want the first time, it can be a great place to start. The final automated selection tool in this group is Focus Area, and this is going to try to calculate, by analyzing the sharpness and softness in the image, what's in focus and what's out of focus. So it can be really helpful if you have an image with a shallow depth of field that you want to make an adjustment to just the blurry or just the focus ranges. And you can adjust that with this slider here. So a very narrow in focus range really will only select the sharpest parts of the image, and a really loose will select a much wider focal range. With the advanced setting, image noise level, this is a very, very specific setting, so it's not really something you need to worry about much at all unless you're working with a really grainy image. We can soften the edge, which is in the other tools too. Soften the edge of the selection and output to a bunch of different things. Right now we're focusing on selections, so I'm just going to keep it set as the default. Lots of times you can really rely on the defaults for these selection tools and not really mess with anything too much and get a good selection. So the final automated tool for making selections is probably the most powerful, and it's called Select and Mask. So this is an entire masking environment that takes you out of Photoshop and into a new window to make much more complex selections. And you can see within this tool, there are a lot of different variables to change. Global refinements, edge detection. In the view menu, there are a bunch of different options that can change the way that you visualize the mask that you're working on. Starting with onion skin, it's going to show you transparency. Marching ants, it's going to show you the selection itself, which is referred to as marching ants because the little border in a selection moves. It can show you an overlay, which is sort of a Ruby Lith kind of metaphor. And then it can show you on black or on white. Black and white, which is just going to show you grayscale representation, or on layers. So if you have multiple layers, you're making your selection, you can see it in real time with the layers that are behind it, with the isolation you're making sitting on top of it. That can often be the most common one that's used for when you're working on compositing. But For now, a good way to look at it would be using overlay, because it's really easy to see with this red overlay. It's going to show us exactly what we're isolating. So we have this suite of different brushes here, and start with the quick selection tool. It's just like the one that we were using in Photoshop, and you use it to begin your selection with just clicking around. So after I let go of this mouse button, Photoshop does a calculation. So it's thinking after I paint a selection in. Watch it move. So it refines that based on these settings. We can increase edge detection, and the edge will change and make new calculations. We can smooth out the selection, which is going to reduce the edge detail. We can feather it. We can increase the contrast, which is going to tighten up the edge quite a bit. And then we can shift the edge in or out by a percentage. Shift edge is a very important tool. Often we'll just leave all of these others at their default, create a selection, and then shift the edge in or out just a bit to refine it. Output settings are useful if we're working on a composite where the edges of the thing we're isolating need to change in color to match their background. So it's a pretty specific refinement that's used in certain cases. It's important to know it exists, but it's going to render out an actual pixel layer with some color adjustments within your selection. There are also a couple of refinement tools. So the Refine Edge brush tool is going to basically make additional calculations to the edge. What you do is you start with the main selection tool, move into the Refine tool, and just paint around the edges, and it should tighten them up. Rest of these tools are just like the ones that you would find in Photoshop. They're used hand tool for moving around the image, lasso tool for making a manual selection, and then this brush tool also creates a manual selection by painting this red into the image, which will result in solid areas of this selection. So you can click OK to set your selection, and this one output to a mask. So you have all those choices in terms of output. One of those is a mask. One last point about selections, there's one more important control that you need to know about, and that is transform selection. So if you have a selection active, you can make all of the adjustments using the same transform that we're familiar with on the selection itself. Once again, this isn't anything that changes the image. It only changes the selection that you've made, and that can be really useful.